Hi everybody, my name's Tanya Notley. I'm from the Institute for Culture and Society at Western Sydney University.
And I'm Michael Dejuani. I'm from the Digital Media Research Centre at QUT.
We're here to talk about the Australian Media Literacy Alliance Media Literacy Framework, the AMLA Media Literacy Framework. So we'd really like to just explain the framework, talk about where it comes from and what it can help people do who are delivering media literacy. The Media Literacy Framework was developed in partnership with AMLA, and really it comes about as an attempt to support a national approach to media literacy. We really looked at the evidence of what works in media literacy pedagogy, but we also looked at national approaches. And we were particularly inspired by the Netherlands, who have for a whole decade now used a media literacy framework to bring all of these hundreds and hundreds of different actors on board so that everybody's using a shared framework and they're contributing to shared goals and shared aspirations. Michael, perhaps we could talk about our definition for media literacy, and I've got a slide, so I might bring it up.
Yeah. Just as Tanya's bringing the slide up there. So our definition of media literacy is that it is the ability to critically engage with media in all aspects of life. It's a form of lifelong literacy that is essential for full participation in society. And I suppose the key words there are critically engage with media. And there are lots of ways that you can think about critically engaging with media, I suppose. The way I like to think about it is that we want to encourage people to reflect on their media use and to be aware of their own media use. So it's about that kind of reflective practice. And so ultimately, I suppose, we would want a media literate person to be thinking about the media that they're consuming and producing on a daily basis. And one of the ways that we think about this is to have a set of key concepts to assist with that, that critical reflection. And so this is an internationally recognised framework. It's been used in media education and media literacy for probably 20 or 30 years ago now. It was originally, a version of it was originally developed by the British Film Institute in the UK for use in schools with regard to thinking critically about the media. But since then, it's really been applied to a whole range of different kinds of contexts and scenarios. So UNESCO, for instance, uses a version of this for their media and information literacy framework. So the point of these key concepts is really, I think, to shine a light on particular angles or particular ways of thinking about any example of media and any example of where you might be interacting with media. So the first one on the screen there is technologies. So you can have people start to reflect on how media technologies are used to access, create, and circulate media. So whenever you are interacting with a form of media, whether it's television or a social media platform, we might be thinking reflectively about the kind of access that technology provides to people, the ways in which it enables people to create types of media. And these days, of course, with social media, that includes creating your own media and sharing that with family and friends and communities that you're part of. And then the ways in which that technology enables messages and ideas to be circulated. And of course, this can be very controversial depending on the platform at hand. So we know, for instance, that there's been quite a bit of discussion recently about Facebook and the kinds of ways in which Facebook enables particular messages to be circulated and whether or not they do a good enough job of regulating content on their particular platform, for instance. The next one is media representations, and this is really about how people, places and ideas are portrayed in the media. So it's about things like stereotyping and othering of particular groups. It's about thinking about whether or not people are being portrayed fairly or justly, or if, for instance, there might be examples of bias in representations. Media audiences, that's about thinking about the people who use and respond to the media, but we can ask critical questions about this as well. So we can consider if a particular piece of media is trying to target a particular audience and how that example is targeting the audience, and therefore the kinds of techniques that are being used to appeal to that particular audience. But the other thing about audiences is that they often respond differently to how their media originally intended. So we can also think about how audiences might use the media for their own purposes, and kind of reapply the media or remix the media to make new kinds of messages. Media institutions is about those organisations that produce, distribute, regulate and educate about media. So this is where we think about, well, who has made this piece of media? Why did they make it? Is there a profit motive? Or is this a non-profit organisation? Is it a political organisation that is creating this piece of media and therefore, you know, they're trying to persuade someone? Is the media organisation that's making this piece of media known to have a particular political bias, for instance? But the aspects that are about regulation and policy are also really important. So we often would focus on the kinds of rules and regulations that exist in a particular society to enable certain types of media to be produced and other types of media perhaps to be censored or not allowed to circulate in society, and so on. Media languages is really about that creating meaning through images, sound and text. And this is where we can look at a particular example of media and really focus on how meaning is being created through the use of particular imagery, the use of particular words, how sound is being used to emphasize certain parts of that example of media. So if it's an advertisement, for instance, we might focus on the persuasive language in that advertisement. If it is a news report, we might focus on the content and whether or not different people who are relevant to that news example are being given an equal amount of time to speak in the news report, and so on. And then finally, the last concept is media relationships. And this is where we think about how media provide a key motivation for the production, use and circulation of media. So it's about the relationship that the individual has with the media. This has become even more important with social media than it ever has been before. So we have a relationship with a particular social media platform, and that can actually be through something like the algorithm, for instance. So the algorithm kind of gets to know us as a person and therefore recommends certain content to us as an individual in that kind of technological relationship we have. But we can also think about how we often will share media content with family and friends as part of our relationship with our family and friends. So there are lots of ways in which relationships are really key to how we might think about the media. And so through thinking about this set of key concepts, then these provide us with ways to critically reflect on our use of media and examples where we might be producing media. So Tanya, I might turn to you now to talk about the competencies, the 10 competencies that we think about in this framework as the basis for learning.
Sure. And I think, you know, a useful thing to say about the key concepts is, you know, that these key concept areas might not always be explicitly put to learners. Of course, you know, whatever that learning activity needs is, it needs to be age appropriate and it needs to be context appropriate and it has to appeal to that particular audience. So it might not be asking them these, it might be asking these direct questions, it might not be, but you know, the starting point obviously might be making a video, making an animation, or it might be learning how to fact check, to be a fact checker. So yeah, there's many different kind of starting points, but behind that, all of these things are embedded to make sure that learners are supported to ask those critical questions and have that critical orientation. But I think it's also important as part of this framework to really think about what the learning initiative is trying to achieve. And so we believe that media literacy should do all of these things here. Overall, it should be helping learners to reflect, to understand, to use and to achieve things with media. And I'll go through all of these. But again, not every single initiative will be doing all of these 10 things. But having these kind of clear objectives for media literacy, I think really gives learning resources or programs it really gives them a clear objective, but it also makes them measurable, because how are you going to measure success? So to start here with reflects, media literacy is really about, this is so fundamentally important, supporting learners to reflect on their own media use. And so, as Michael already mentioned, that should be happening every day, all the time, through every bit of engagement. There's a reflection going on there, you know. Is this working for me? You know, am I happy with the way this social media engagement is representing me or representing others? You know, so always that kind of reflective attitude going on. And the other thing is curiosity. Learning resources and materials should always be supporting and fostering people's curiosity and encouraging people to ask those questions that are absolutely at the heart of media literacy. And then moving to understand, you know, and this is really speaking to the core concepts here, particularly 3 and 5, which is knowing that media influence and impact people and society, and understanding that media construct versions of reality. This is really speaking to the representation core concept, which is so important for media literacy. So, you know, really recognizing that media do have this influence and impact, that really allows us to then ask these questions about who's being impacted here, how are people being represented? And of course, media are never reality, they're always a representation of reality. So really being able to, again, think through what is being represented and presented, and is that fair and accurate? And also knowing that a range of different institutions impact media participation, and that goes back to that institution's core concept. So knowing that, yes, there's who owns the media, who's produced it, who's distributing it, but also who's regulating it. So really understanding all of those different institutions. And of course, you know, as Michael said, it's also about media education, because media places that provide access to media and support to use media also change who can participate with media. So it's really thinking through those different institutions and the role they're playing. And then moving to uses. So users technology to consume and produce media. This is critical. Someone who's media literate will be using media in their everyday lives, and will be able to use a whole range of media in order to participate in society fully. And so essential to media literacy, and someone who's media literate can use and critique a variety of media formats. So that critique is really important. Those critical questions are always being asked. And then communicates using the language and conventions of a variety of media forms. This is speaking to the languages core concept. So really being able to, you know, someone who's media literate is really thinking about the language they're using, they're thinking about the images they use, and thinking about the consequences of those. So both in terms of being effective, getting an audience, but also being responsible and accurately representing different people and places as well. and then achieves, someone who's media literate should be able to use media really effectively in their lives to achieve their own personal goals, but also to achieve professional goals and collective goals of the communities they're part of. So being able to successfully manage personal, social, public relationships using media. This is obviously really important. We become very public and visible with our media use now, and there can be really both positive and negative consequences of that. So really thinking that through before posting content or before developing a profile. And someone who's media literate is able to confidently achieve their objectives and their goals through media, as I said, their personal goals, but also, you know, professional and collective goals. So these are really the learning outcomes that you would be seeking to support broad media literacy in a particular group or community. And these can also be used to inform how you evaluate the success of those initiatives, which I'll pass over to you, Michael, to talk about.
Yeah, so the last part of the framework focuses on knowledge indicators. And really the key point here is just that for any particular context, you do need to create knowledge indicators that draw on the key concepts and the competencies to evaluate the work that you're doing with people. And it's really important to note, I think, that these are age and context appropriate. So we just wanted to indicate on the framework that we can't say that those competencies, for instance, are the end goal for everyone at every stage of life. It's really important to contextualize and to have quite specific learning outcomes that are developed for those specific instances of media literacy activities. And so that's really an overview of the overall framework.